Hey everyone, welcome to video number 2. Today's video we're going to talk about depression, and I want to take a moment just to recap what we had talked about the other day in our previous video about coming out and depression and how they are similar in nature. And I just wanted to recap and say that they are not a choice, they are not specific, they are not contagious, and they do not define you as an individual. And that's very important, and that's going to be something that we need to make sure that everyone is aware of. And so before I move on, I want to lead off with a quote. And that quote is, "Depression is the inability to talk about your own problems while taking on everyone else's to hide your own." And so I want to break that down for a second. I want to talk about that a little bit more in depth. So what that is saying is depression is you not having the ability to talk about your own problems while you take on everyone else's problems to hide the fact that you have problems. And I am guilty of that 110%. Joe used to always tell me that I cared way too much about others than I do my own self. And it wasn't until here recently when I finally decided to heed what he had said and go from there. So it is true. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about my story. But I want to talk about depression. And like I said, what is depression? Like we mentioned yesterday in our other video. So depression does not define you as an individual, and that's something that I'm going to hit home every single time we talk about this. It does not define you as a person. Depression does not make up Justin. It does not make up anybody who is watching this video. There are many types of depressions out there. We have major depressions, we have chronic depressions, we have situational depression, seasonal depressions, postpartum depression, premenstrual depression, bipolar depression. The list just keeps going on and on and on. And each one of those depressions affects someone and each person differently. No two people's depressions are the same. And that's what I guess we want to make sure that we also hit home here is just because someone is depressed and they're experiencing one thing does not mean that that's the way you are going to experience the depression that you're encountering as well. And that is something that is really important that we need to make sure that we understand. So what does depression do and how does it do it? Well, again, that's something that's personal. On a personal level, but depression typically affects the way one interacts with school, work, life, and relationship. They can interfere, or depression can interfere with any or all of those. Like I said, it does affect everyone differently. And so what I do want to say is I do want to mention that depression has an amazing way to lie to you. Depression tends to tell you that things are okay. Depression tells you that you're not depressed. Depression tells you that you're not good enough. Depression tells you that you're not suffering from anxiety. You're not suffering from any type of situational. But while at the same time, what's happening is not bad enough either. And so there's typically, unfortunately, one or two ways to deal with this, either to seek treatment or to let depression take over you. And I want to talk about some of the signs and symptoms of depression before we go on any further. So depression manifests an unlimited amount of signs and symptoms, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly which one. Just like a lot of other viral diseases or bacterial causes, just because you have one symptom does not mean that you have that condition. And that's the same way with depression. Depression typically causes one to be anxious or to have that side feeling or that emptiness feeling within inside of them. It typically makes you feel hopeless. It typically has a guilt or a worthless or a helpless feeling associated with it. It typically has an effect that causes you to lose your interest in things and activities that you once enjoyed. It decreases your energy and causes fatigue. It causes difficulties making decisions or the right decisions. It causes you to have the inability to sleep or insomnia, or it causes you to sleep. It does cause restlessness and irritability, and unfortunately, it also can cause um, death by suicide as well. And we'll talk more about that one here in a few minutes as well. But like I've mentioned already, uh, death is not the answer. So how does depression typically affect the individual? And again, like I said, and I'm going to continue to say it, it affects each individual separately or differently. For men, again, this channel is geared towards men of the LGBT community because that's what I have more experience with. But men typically get the irritability feeling, they get the loss of interest, they get the inability to make the right decisions, and they also typically convert over to drugs and alcohol as a way of coping with the situational problems at hand. Women typically get those feelings of guilt, anger, sad, hopeless, worthless, and those types of emotional feelings associated with it. Men also typically revert to what we call self-destructive behavior, and again, that could be drugs and alcohol. That could be going off into doing extreme sports, and potentially causing yourself harm by doing something that you normally wouldn't do if you were in your right mind. So what is it that we can do for depression? And there are many different options out there for you if you have depression. The first step is accepting the fact that you do have depression. And I have learned, unfortunately, the hard way. I failed to accept that I had depression. I would teeter along the lines of it for a while, but it wasn't here until the last couple of weeks that I realized that I am depressed and I needed to seek help for that depression. And I was diagnosed with bipolar depression and am on treatment for that. And we'll get through it, right? Because it does get better. So what are there to do for depressions? And we'll talk about different things. There are meditations, and there's yoga, and there is other herbal and natural methods to treat depression. There are pharmaceutical ways to treat depression. SSRIs, or select serotonin reuptake inhibitors. There are, mood enhancing medications. There are other types of pharmaceutical help out there. There's self-help, pharmaceutical, as well as therapy out there. A lot of people are able to get through depression by just having someone there on their side and talking with them and giving them different ways to cope and handle situations here with what they're dealing with. And so just because you are depressed does not mean you have to be placed on medication. That's something that a lot of people are hesitant about doing, is they don't want to take a pill every day for the rest of their life, and that does not always have to be the case. I personally have experienced the power of meditation and yoga. I am enjoying those two right now, and I am in therapy with a counselor, and I'm doing these videos to talk about my problems and to help somebody along the way. And I got my first acupuncture session coming up in a couple of days, and I'm excited for that. And I'm just experiencing a lot of different things. I do have a prescription of medications, but I'm trying to hold back on those. I don't want to take those yet until I absolutely have to. But I have found out that doing my meditation and my yoga, going for massages and those type of things kind of do help me. I have lost about 33 pounds since being back in the States since June of 2016, and I can contribute that to working out a little bit more. And because of my situation that occurred, I hit the gym a little bit harder, and I thought I was doing it for the right reasons, but it came out that I was doing them for the wrong reasons. And now that I'm doing them for the right reasons, I'm finding that that is helping me a lot. And it's definitely helping me physically and mentally. Um, and that's always a plus. So, you know, when you're a size 34 jean, but you used to wear 31, 32, you know, progressing back down to that 31, 32 is always a very uplifting feeling. And you know, when we came back to the States in June of 2016, I was wearing size large shirts that were still almost too short or too small on me. And I was wearing size 34, 36 jeans. And you know, I started going to the gym, and now I'm back down into my medium shirts, and I'm back down into my 32s, treading back into 31s, and I'm excited for that. And that type of feeling, that release of hormones, is amazing. So I do want to talk about that as well, since I brought that up. Hormones can influence depression a lot as well. So that is why it's very important that if you are experiencing any type of those symptoms that we've already talked about, you do seek medical help. Your depression could be something as simple as your hormones being out of whack because of your thyroid, or because of your pituitary gland, or some type of internal problem, not necessarily being situational or bipolar mood disorder, or you know, one of those chronic diseases, because depression is a disease, it is an illness, and it doesn't have to be those. It could be something that, you know, you could take some more salt or reduce salt, or something in your diet or something. So do seek medical professional help, get some lab work done, make sure that it's not a hormonal imbalance as well. So moving on, we talked about what men do and what women do, and how men typically revert to self-destructive behavior, and that's not the answer. So what I want to do for the next few minutes is I want to talk about my depression a little bit more in depth, and kind of go from there. So my depression started kind of in my high school years, honestly. When I was struggling with the identity crisis that I was having, that's when my depression kind of kicked in hardcore. And over the years, you know, I was able to kind of to combat my depression on my own. You know, finally, when I accepted that I was a gay male, that kind of helped a little bit. But then I found myself into a cycle of self-destructive behavior where I was very promiscuous. I was doing things that I shouldn't be doing, putting myself at risk, putting myself in harm. So I ended up stopping all of that, for the most part. But drinking was definitely still something that I was doing, and I needed to stop immediately. So again, my parents divorced, and you know, having that lack of acceptance, and you know, not meeting that psychological need of acceptance, and feeling that rejection that we talked about in our previous video, led me to have even more depression. You know, my parents got divorced and they remarried, and I wasn't invited to the weddings, and I wasn't invited into their new lives, and all that. It really took a toll on my life. And I found myself in Richmond, Virginia, from Kentucky all the way to Richmond for no reason, which, like, again, I'm proud that I did. And you know, you guys will learn more along the lines of why I was happy that I did. But when I was in Richmond, Virginia, I did find myself sitting in my bed one day, and this is now me opening up and telling the world that I was borderline ready to commit suicide. I was laying in bed, and at that time, myself and Joe had just been dating probably about 6 months at this period. I was laying in bed while he was in school, and I could not pinpoint why I was crying. I didn't have a reason. I wasn't mad. I wasn't upset. I wasn't sad, but I was just crying hysterically. And during that process, I found that I had my gun in my hand. So I had completely just zoned out. I did not know what was going on, and I had my gun in my hand at this time. And I was scared for my life at that moment, because at any moment in that trance state that I was in, I could have harmed myself. And what really helped me understand what I was doing is when I was sitting there, and I can remember distinctively what was happening. I was thinking about my parents and thinking about my life and where I was going, and Joe kept popping up in my mind. Joe was there, and he loved me, and he wanted to be with me, and I couldn't do this, and this isn't what I wanted to do. So I went and pawned my gun that day. And it wasn't until here recently, in the last couple of weeks, have I ever told anybody. And Joe was the first person to know about that. Now I'm telling you about the situation, and it's hard. It's a hard situation. But that did not end my depression, unfortunately. My depression still carried on for the longest time. And the way I hid my depression was by doing exactly what I did, or what I quoted at the beginning of the video, is I always took everybody else's problems on, or found a reason to complain about something so that I didn't have to admit that I had a problem. If I could find, something in my workplace that wasn't making me happy, or if I could find something in my social network that wasn't making me happy, I could complain about that, right? Because that gave me an avenue to complain, but it was never really about what resided within me. And so Joe and we got accepted into medical school overseas, and we ecstatically accepted, and we got there, and it was not like what we had imagined. So instantly my mind was like, okay, now I've got all this to bring into effect. And the school, it was a good school. Now that I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about it, I was getting what I was supposed to get out of it. But because of my depression, I wanted to make it better. And instead of me saying, hey, Joe, look, I'm having this problem. Can you sit down and listen to me and talk to me? Because he would have. I instead fought and argued about the school, or about the island, or about something. And it was never about any of those things. It was always about me, and what resided within me. And so what I had found is that on the island, island life is challenging. It's for sure not for everyone. And the island closes down at like 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and everybody just finds themselves a little bar on the corner of the street, and they just drink the night away, and that's acceptable. And so I joined in that crowd, and I found myself pretty much every night while we were living on the island for that year drinking at least something. And it wasn't good. It was a very bad, destructive behavior for me. And so Joe and we had transferred schools on the island, and that school was even a worse school than we were at. We should have just stayed where we were at, but I made it uncomfortable. And so Joe decided to make the decision very instantaneously that we were leaving the island. We were no longer going to be there. And I got so excited because Joe made the decision to do something, and I have been begging for that for the last 6 years of our life, that like, please stand up. And if I say something that's not right, or if I want to do something that's not right, stand up and stand your ground and tell me, Justin, I don't want to do this. This is not what I want to do, or I don't think this is a good idea, and I will listen to you. Don't always go with the flow, I guess. And that's what happened. So we came back to the United States in June of 2016, and at that point I had really noticed that I had been drinking heavily. Just the night before, or the nights before we left, I had spent every single night extremely intoxicated. We used to go to this place called the Red Bus, and we became really good friends with the owner. And one of the last nights we were there, we went out with her for the first time on the island. And I don't remember how much I spent, or how much I really drank, but I was pretty bad off. We went back to her business, or back to the Red Bus, and we sat in her truck, and we drank and drank and drank. I think we probably drank her out of pretty much all the beer that she had in her restaurant that night. And I feel so bad for it, because like we didn't have to do that, and like that was bad. And so anyway, we came back to the States in June, and I found myself a little bit not as depressed, but I was depressed because there's only one thing in the world that matters to me more than anything else, and that is Joe. And I want his success and his happiness more than I would ever want my own success and my happiness. And I could tell that Joe was a little nervous about where we were going with our career. Joe wants to be a doctor. He is going to be a doctor. He's going to be the best damn doctor in the world, and uh, I can't wait to see that. I wish that he would allow me to experience that with him, but right now that's not the possibility. But I could sense that Joe was not happy, or he was nervous about where we were going with our careers, and um, so I had an opportunity to escape one night, and I took that escape, and I went to Lexington, where we graduated from our undergraduate, and um, I needed to do something the next day. And during that process, as soon as I got into Lexington, I met a friend of ours for dinner, and just in that few minutes of being at dinner, I had already downed 4 or 5 margaritas from Fridays, and not the small ones. I'm talking about the big ones. And um, then we left there and we went straight to another bar where it was 2-for-1 drinks, and I think I had probably had 3 or 4 of the drinks, so I had either 6 or 8 drinks total. And then we left there and we went over to another bar where uh, there was some more friends of ours or acquaintances of ours there, and I had spent the rest of my night there just drinking heavily, beer after beer after beer after shot after shot after shot, and I had drank myself into a complete stupor that I should have never been in because I had no reason to be in that situation. Um, During the process, that whole night, I was talking to our acquaintances about myself and Joe and our plans and our future and our practice and where we were going and how we were going to get there and just life in general. And I really wanted nothing more to talk to Joe. And um, so I called him, and he was busy doing something, and he called me back. And at that point, I was mad because I had called him like 5 times in the matter of a minute, and he didn't answer. And it was already too late. I was drunk and mad, and nothing that anybody said to me was going to make any difference. I was pissed off. And so, even though I knew I shouldn't have drank, because just prior to doing that, I had taken one of the acquaintances over to another bar next door to where we were, because he had never been there, and we were doing shots and drinking inside of that bar. And I did a shot, and before it even got down to my stomach, it was coming back up. I barely made it to the restroom before I threw up all over the place. And that should have been an indication that I needed to stop drinking, but I did not let that stop me. I continued to drink. And so when the situation between Joe and I occurred, I was already really mad, and at the end of the bar sat this kid who had kept coming up to our table where we were sitting outside to just mingle. And he was sitting there, and I slammed my phone down on top of the bar because I was done with Joe. He had already made me mad, and he had scooted over and was talking. I asked for another drink, but the bartender had said no, it was time to go. He was closing, and so this kid was like, "Don't worry about it." He was just saying like, "You're better than that. Don't let something like this get to you." He had no idea what I was talking about or why I was even mad. He was just saying those things, I guess, to kind of ease my mind a little bit, to let me relax. He wasn't really hitting on me. He was just saying that, it's nothing that's that serious, just relax, it'll get better, blah, 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 blah. Just those types of things. And so I asked Chris one more time, who was the bartender at that time, if I could have another drink. I was like, I just need one more. And he said no. And that kid was like, yeah, I would really want another drink too. Well, I knew my friend had liquor and beer at the house, so I was like, you know what? I'm going to go back and drink at my friend's house. If you want to come. And he obliged and agreed, and I finally got an Uber and told him where we were going, and he drove his car to the house, and we kind of arrived at the same time. And when I finally got inside and I was getting ready to make a drink, I realized that I no longer wanted to drink anymore. I had things to do that next morning, and I needed to go. So I told the kid, I was like, I'm sorry I brought you all the way out here, but I'm going to have you go. I don't want to drink anymore. And he was kind of upset. He said he needed to use the restroom, and I allowed him to use the restroom before he left, and I told him that he could just shut the door on the way out. It'll lock on its own. And so I went into the room that I was staying, which is across the hall from the restroom, and I started getting ready for bed. Pulled the sheets down, took off my shirt, was getting ready to go to bed, and at the same time, this door opened, and he came in and he did whatever he planned on doing, I guess. So long story short, because of my self-destructive behavior, I put myself in a situation where I had no business being in, and that situation ultimately ruined my relationship um, with the person that meant the most to me. And so, maybe he's watching these videos, maybe he's not, and maybe he doesn't care, but um, depression can do a lot of things to you that you don't want to happen. Depression, on top of the alcohol and drugs and self-destructive behavior, can make you do a lot of things. And I wasn't in my relationship. I wasn't not happy. I was extremely happy. I left that day, gave Joe a hug and kiss, and told him I loved him, and I would see him tomorrow. And I was that whole night I had spent talking about him. I didn't want what happened. Um, it's not what I wanted. Is drugs and alcohol an excuse? No. Does it lower your inhibitions? Yes, it does. There are statistical studies out there that show if you binge drink, you do make choices that you should not typically make. But I'm not here to talk about that right now. So that's just one example of self-destructive behavior. And like I said, being promiscuous is another. There are, millions of diseases out there that you should not be putting yourself at. HIV, syphilis, gonorrhea, which are now becoming drug resistant and could be potentially lifelong. We typically make poor decisions when we're drunk. Otherwise, decisions that we wouldn't make. So is depression the reason why you make those decisions? No, but if you are depressed, you can circle into that self-destructive behavior, which can lead you into making poor decisions. So wrapping up this video, I want to talk about there are treatment options out there, and we've already talked about a few: social network groups, support counseling, pharmaceutical, naturopathic options. Just get help. If you're finding that your depression is winning and depression is taking over you, please report to a nearest emergency department. Please report to a nearest psychiatrist. Get help. Taking your life is not the answer. It's not. You are worth more than that. And let me be the first one to tell you, it does get better. My breakup is still very fresh. We're only about 3 weeks now, and it's not getting better for me right now, but each day it's getting a little easier for me. And so just take that. It does get better, and you're worth it. Okay, so that's the most important thing. Don't let depression define you as an individual, and there are supports out there. If you need help and you are struggling and you don't know what to do next, please reach out to me, email me, let me know. I will help you the best I can from as far away as I can. But just know that I am here for you. Our next video is going to talk about drugs and alcohol and those vices a little bit more in depth. And so I hope this video was of something of interest to you. And again, hopefully over the next couple of videos, the content will get a little bit better. The editing and whatnot will also increase. This is just my second video, so bear with me as I'm still learning how to do this. But until then, enjoy your evening, and until we meet again.